Welcome to the Cherland podcast, where I meet up with a musician, ask them about their life, what makes them tick, how they make their art. On today's podcast, we have Micah Bournes. I have massive respect for this man. He's been a full-time artist for the past 10 years, which is a feat in and of itself. Not only that, the art he makes is incredibly thought-provoking. I would consider it beyond his years. Granted, I'm younger than him, so everything is beyond my years, technically. And he's the first guy that ever taught me how paying taxes as an independent musician was going to go. So I am incredibly grateful to him for that. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I think there's a ton of stuff to learn inside of this conversation, so please enjoy.
First off, love your book. I also realized I re-listened to A Time Like This. I listened to it when it first came out, and when it first came out, I definitely was not the target audience for what you were making, but I feel like it's only more relevant now. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that album? How do you feel about the timing of that album? What is it like to have put that out and then go through everything in this last year?
Yeah, no, you were the target audience. My new stuff, you're not. No, it's true. And that's something that I've realized about my own work. I talk a lot. I've always talked about racial issues just because of who I am, right? So I'm writing about my life and things like that. But I was never really conscious of my audience. But what I realized is I was always just talking to whoever I was around. Well, I started writing in college, and I went to a predominantly white school. And then after college, I started, I moved to Oregon for 2 years. And I lived in Central Oregon. It was a beautiful little town, but again, predominantly white area.
Does Bend?
It was Bend, yeah. And so the way I would talk about racial issues, I would be talking about the Black experience, but I was very aware that most of the time I would look out at the open mic or at the schools I was getting booked at, and it was mostly white folk.
Right.
So they didn't necessarily always receive it or understand it, but I was talking to them. And what I realized was I don't regret that work by any means. It was a particular time in my life, and it was necessary to let me explain this to white folk. But I was talking about Black people. I wasn't talking to Black people. I wasn't talking with Black people. Yeah. I was explaining Black things to white audiences. And so you actually were my target audience. Now you're absolutely not. And I made that shift just because I realized that, and I don't regret anything I made. I think there's a time and place for that, and that work still exists, and people are still being challenged by it. But now, with my solo stuff, that is, because I have this joint project, but now with my solo stuff, both with the book, but mostly my next hip-hop album, I call it FUBU, the brand that stands for us, by us.
Yeah.
And I'm writing now with Black people in mind. Now I'm even if I'm addressing the same issues, to talk about police brutality, to talk about white supremacy to a room full of Black people is different than a room full of white folks. Now, right now, we can't do shows, so it's not actual rooms. But in my head, it's how do we feel? Instead of let me explain what institutional racism is or why police brutality is a thing, now it's man, how are you feeling? Let's check in with each other. Let's grieve together without having to explain certain things. I'm taking certain experiences for granted, right? I'm speaking in this communal we. When I'm talking to white folks, ain't no communal we when I'm talking about the Black experience, right? I'm explaining this is how it is for us.
Yeah.
Now I'm not explaining anything. Now it's let's mourn together. Let's dream together. Let's think of something better. Let's heal each other. And so that actually is a huge shift in tone. Even though the subject matter is similar. So,
how did you make that transition from speaking with one audience in mind and then switching to, I'm just going to speak from people who already believe this thing that we know to be true because we experience it? How did you make that transition?
Yeah, it was gradual. A lot of it, some of it was just from fatigue of, to be honest, like, I got tired of, like, people listen to a time like this. And I mean, just like you said, like, oh, it sounds relevant now. I mean, it came out in 2018. I was writing it before that, so it's several years old. But you could listen to it today, and a lot of folks are like, oh, wow, like, like, this is still so relevant. And I guess I've been talking about these things for 10 years. And I got frustrated when some of my white friends who've been known me and known my work or seen these conversations would ask things like, and I'm talking about like this year even, but yeah. I started kind of transitioning before this year. But, earlier this year when all the protests around George Floyd and all this stuff, I saw so many people be like, where do I start? And I'm like, where do you start? Where have you been? You know what I'm saying? Like,
you can listen to any art. I have albums. Everyone else has albums.
Bruh. I'm like, where have you been, like, in the nation? But especially if you follow my work, like, where do you start? And I was just kind of like, you know what? I'm not going to spend the next 10 years of my life explaining things to white people from square one. I did that. Again, that content exists. It can help some people. But I realized for me, my own spirit was, I was failing to check in with myself and my people. I was using my gifts exclusively to educate the folks who were frustrating me, which I don't think is bad, but to do that at all. But I did find it a problem to do it exclusively. And so it was just kind of this gradual thing where I'm like, why do I keep having these same conversations?
Right.
It is not as an individual, like, the conversations, if there's people still there, then yes, they still need to be had. But I feel like I've done my term. I'm going to pass the baton on to other folks. And right now, I found myself craving just community of folks who understand. Not that I was just trying to surround myself with people who agree with me. That's not what it was about. Mm-hmm. Again, it was like, I haven't even been addressing how this is affecting us and myself as a Black person. And yeah, I just eventually, I just found myself doing it when I would sit down to write. And then I was like, why don't I do this on purpose, actually? And that's why, like, my book is the dedication page. It says, to little Black kids with big Black dreams. Yep. But really, it's not just children. It's Black people with Black dreams, to Black adults with Black dreams. Like, now this conversation is ours. Now, we know other people are going to be listening in, and that's fine, but they're not going to be centered in my art. They're not going to be the people that I'm talking to first and foremost. So yeah, I'm very excited about it. And I mean, the way that it has changed how I write is drastic. It's, again, especially with this new album that I'm working on that'll come out later. But yeah, it's pretty lovely.
How has it felt within, like, your own heart and body to go from having to explain everything to just being able to relate? I imagine immense relief, but probably more than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even just since I've made that transition, and even communities of, now that I'm making this work, I'm looking to engage communities that have a lot more Black artists and Black folks and people of color. And it just feels good to be, on the poster of an event and not be the only Black person. It feels like relief. It feels like I have something to contribute, but I'm not carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I'm not here to represent all Black people. I'm just here to be myself. Mm-hmm. And I'm here to just bring what I offer as an individual, as a poet, but I'm like, again, even though events have slowed down, there has been so many virtual events and other things and other ways that I've been connecting with communities. And I'm like, oh, there's like 8 of us speaking here. It was like, cool. It just feels great. There's 8 Black people on this, lineup. That feels so different from being the only Black person on the lineup.
Yeah.
And it just feels like I can just be myself. And I don't have to explain myself. I love it. I absolutely love it.
I'm sure that frees you up to talk about other subjects other than the fact that you're black.
Absolutely.
You could talk about anything you want.
Absolutely. And that's what I feel like my book is. You know, like the first section, the book is like in 3 sections. And the first one definitely is about specifically the black experience. But the other 2 sections are about all kind of other stuff. The second section is about relationships of all kinds. So family, friendships, romance. And these are things that I've written about for years. But because I became known as an artist who talked about social justice and race a lot, I found myself getting booked at conferences and events that were themed on that, but predominantly white conferences and events. So I was writing this broad range of work, but when I was doing shows, I was only performing the poems about race, you know? And again, it was necessary. That's cool. But I love with the book that I'm like, yeah, I'm talking to black folks, but I can, and therefore I can talk about all of it, like you said. And so it just feels good to just talk about women I have a crush on, you know, and talk about, you know, like, I don't know, family issues, my relationship with my dad, you know, and just be. So it feels good for sure.
You mentioned family issues. One of my favorite recurring segments on your Instagram is your mom who doesn't understand the art that you do. Can you tell me about your mom and your relationship with her?
Yeah, man. I love my mama, but whoo, you know, whoo. As an artist, it's something that I've had to really come to terms with. No matter what you do as a child, most children, if you have a relationship with your parents, even if it's not a great one, if you just have one, you know, no matter how much we are independent or rebel, you know, there's a part of us that often just seeks the approval and affirmation of your parents, right? And my mother has never been a fan of my career choice. And I think it's because I know it's because she worries a lot, right?
Yes.
And so in her mind, you know, doing something more traditional where you have a steady income and good health insurance and, you know, where your income isn't dependent on whether or not you get gigs and it's up and down and, you know, and that would make her feel better if I had a more traditional job. And so she looks at what I do and in her mind, like, you know, being a poet, especially, even though I make music too, but in her, like most people know me as a poet. And so she's like, it's not a career, you know, that's a hobby. That's okay. You can write poetry.
How long have you been doing it now?
That's not, I've been full-time for 10 years. I've been writing.
That's not a career, man.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. And, but that's really how she thinks. And I, it's just hard because I had to realize no matter how I go about this, I kept thinking, oh, well, if I accomplish a certain amount of things, or, you know, once I started getting booked internationally, like, look, Mom, I'm going to India, I'm going to France, I'm going to Hong Kong, all for poetry. People are flying me across the world to do poetry. Didn't matter.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just realized, you know what? I respect my parents, but I just have to live a life that is true to myself.
Yeah.
And I just have to accept the fact that she's just not going to understand. There was also an element of it that, because I don't shy away from hard conversations. And I talk about this actually in the outro to the book of poetry, the afterward section. I'll just give it away. But it was this conversation that actually helped me release the need or the desire. I never felt like I needed it, but I still wanted it. The desire for my mother's approval, where we were talking about racial issues. And my mom, you know, I mean, she is almost 70 years old. She's a black woman who grew up in America. She's faced all kind of discrimination and is not in denial about it at all. But I would always get resistance from her, particularly when I would make music and poetry addressing these issues. And I never understood it. And I'm very confrontational with it. And one day she just tells me, she goes, Micah, you're already black. You're already black. Even when you aren't bringing these things up, people see you as a threat, as a problem. So now when you running around saying all these things that make white people mad, she's like, it's like you put a target on your own back. And like, as a mother, as a black mother, as a mother of 3 black boys, you know, how does she feel every time she sees an Ahmaud Arbery, you know, shot while jogging, or someone choked out? And you got a son who's running around like saying controversial things that make white folks mad. It scared her.
Yeah.
And I finally was like, oh, it's not just that poetry isn't a real thing, but it's also the specific type of poetry I go about, or that I write, and the way I go about being a poet that makes my mom uncomfortable. And I get that. And I actually have compassion for that. But that was the moment where I was like, it just don't matter no more. Because I'm not going to not talk about these things. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't stop it so my mom sleeps better at night.
Right.
Like, I have to be true to myself, you know?
Yeah. When did you first become like a full-time poet? When was that leap?
Well, actually, it's the only full-time job I've ever had. For real, like, I went to college having no clue what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I graduated having no clue what I wanted to do. But everything I tried to do, you know, I had a degree in communications. I tried to get a job. I tried so many different things. I tried to go to grad school, but I didn't get in because I failed the GRE. All this stuff. Nothing was working out. And it wasn't even like I felt compelled like I'm supposed to be an artist. It was like I'd started writing songs and poems in college, and I was a few months from after graduation. It was like the fall. I graduated in May.
From where?
I was living in Chicago. I went to a school called Moody.
Okay.
And I was living on my friend's couch, basically, and I was trying to find a job in Chicago, and I ran out of money by the end of the summer. So I had to move back to Long Beach, and I was living with my parents, and I was looking for jobs out here, trying to get out the house. And I realized, I was like, you know what? I couldn't find a job in Long Beach either. And I thought to myself, if I pursue a career as a full-time artist and it doesn't work out, then I will be unemployed, living with my parents, just like I am right now. I'm already there. I'm already unemployed, living with my parents. There's nowhere to go but up from here.
This is my worst fear.
Yeah. I was like, you know what? Like, so why not go for it? So that's why I ended up going for it. And it started with moving to Oregon because I was connected to a community up there that I'd done an internship with that was really big on the arts. So I went up there for 2 years. I had a part-time job, and I was like moving towards being a full-time artist. And then after 2 years in Oregon, when I moved back to Long Beach, I was able to quit that part-time and sustain myself for about 8 years straight off of just my music and poetry. It wasn't until 2018. It actually wasn't until a time like this came out that I had to get a part-time job because that album pissed a lot of people off, and I lost a lot of gigs. But anyway, yeah, it's literally the only thing I've ever done as far as a full-time employment. Again, I've picked up side hustles here and there for a couple months if necessary, but yeah.
What's it feel like to lose a gig because of good art that you put out?
I mean, it feels good, to be honest. Like, it is one of those things where I'm like, it does feel like a relief if I know that they didn't actually want me in my fullness. You know, they only wanted a particular part of me that made them comfortable. Well, then I don't want to be a part of your program, of your show, of your conference, of your nothing, you know? Like, if you want me, then you want me. You're going to get Micah Bournes, you know? But, so yeah, it actually, like, it sucked, but I just knew. I went to this event one time for creatives, and there was someone talking, and they talked about the 3 Ps, and they were talking about how she decides whether or not she takes a gig. And she goes, I have to have at least 2 of the 3 Ps. I don't care how good the third one is. If you don't have 2, then you're going to regret taking the gig. And for her, the Ps were, it was people, price, and project. She's like, if you have 2 of those 3, it'll be worth it.
Yeah.
If you only have 1 of them, no matter how good that one is,
Yeah.
you're going to be frustrated.
Right.
You know? And and she told all kind of stories about one time, like the biggest check she ever got off of like a 1-day gig. She blew all the money that night because the gig was so stressful. She didn't like the people, and she didn't like the gig itself. She just liked the paycheck. But she says it was so stressful that afterwards she went out with her friends and just bought everybody drinks and blew the whole check. She was like, you know, and then so she was like, didn't matter how much money, like I only had 1p, you know. And so I kind of use that now when I'm looking at opportunities. I'm like, you know what, like, yeah, you gotta wait, because there's definitely some things that I'm not too excited about, but I'm like, you know what, this is a project I believe in, and I really love these people. So yeah, they're only paying me like $50, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of hard to wait. But yeah, man, I mean, honestly, at the time, I was frustrated when it started happening. Like I literally, so A Time Like This came out in February of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So by the end of that year, when I filed my taxes and I looked at the numbers, my income in 1 year had got cut in half.
Jeez.
I made literally half as much as what I made in 2018 as I did in 2017 because of that album.
Yeah.
Because places that used to book me was like, we ain't messing with you no more.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Half is a lot.
Yeah. Like I was shocked. I knew it had slowed down, but once I did my taxes for the year, I was like, oh my gosh. Like these fools like just really was like, nah, bro. Like so, and that's when that's when the transition started. I'm like, you know what? You know, like, because I don't feel like I had been saying anything different, but my tone was more direct at the time because of everything going on. I was like, but yeah, that's when I was like, I need to be in spaces where I can be my full self. And also, like, it puts you in this strange position. It's not just with race either. As an artist, again, are you going to make work that you believe in, that you are passionate about, or are you going to tailor your work to whatever is getting you paid or is the most popular, right?
Yep.
It's like, I had a decision to make. I saw this going this way, and I could have pivoted back to work that made, look, white people got money, period. Like, white communities, white universities,
white moms,
you know what I'm saying? White organizations, like, they have money.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one thing that is frustrating to me because I want to be in spaces of color and black spaces, but I am finding they don't have the budgets as much, but this is important to me. So I figured out a way. I launched a Patreon. But it was one of those things where I'm like, am I going to take a different tone so I could just keep getting this money? And I mean, nobody would have been mad at me.
Yeah. Can't really judge you either way.
Right. You know, it's like, it's not like the work I was making before was bad. It just wasn't as direct. But most of all, it just, now at this point in my life, I can't make work like that. I don't regret that it exists, but that's not how I want to go about this discussion. And so it's interesting though, but that's always the thing, man. I have so many artist friends, who are more successful than me, if you're talking about commercially speaking.
Yeah.
But they hate the art they make. Because they made decisions in order to be more successful.
Right.
And they catered to the market. They looked at it as a business first, and it was at the expense of what they actually wanted to say. It's not even necessarily that the art they're making is bad.
Right.
It's just not what they wanted to make.
Right.
But they also wanted that commercial success. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is difficult. Yeah. It's a lot harder than people think. I have had many opportunities over the years to see behind the curtain of the industry, and it ain't cute, bruh. Right. It's like, so many of those artists are miserable.
Right.
You know, they feel stuck. They got everything they wanted and they hate it.
Yeah.
You know, because they haven't made art for themselves in years. Right. You know, like, I mean, early on in into going full time, like within the first year, I got booked on a major tour.
Cool.
It was a 20-city tour. We had a fat tour bus. I got paid $10,000 for 6 weeks.
Great.
And I was like, yo, I can get used to this player, right? Man, I was like, if this what being an artist is, I'm Gucci, okay, you know? So, bro, by the end of that tour, I was like, oh no. Like the headline artist, people from the label showed up with clipboards on like the third or fourth show. Again, it was 20 cities.
Yeah.
And basically we all went out to eat after the show, and all these folks from his label were basically telling him what he did wrong and how he needed to change his show. Oh, you waited too long to do this hit. You got to give the people what they want, blah, 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 blah. And he was like defending himself. He's like, well, I structured it like this because I wanted a particular experience and movements. And they're like, nah. You got to give the people what you want. You got to make sure we sell out all these shows and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, man, that's messed up. Then one night on the tour, he was joking, but he was telling the truth. He was just like, he got a little vulnerable with the artist or with the audience. And he basically was like, yeah, so, you know, I wrote this album because it'd been a couple years since I put anything out, and my label knocked on my door. It's like, hey, bro, we need something to put out. We need to put you on tour. And I was like, wait. So you didn't have something to say. You were just chilling, and the label was like, bruh, give us something to make money off of. Yeah. Yo, if I ain't got nothing to say, I'm not gonna say nothing. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not finna just make an album so you can make money off of me. Yeah. You'll bump that. Oh, no, heck no. You know? I'm like, so anyway, so I had that experience. By the end of that, I had met all these industry folk. And again, at the time, I was thinking mostly like hip hop stuff, but I was in Nashville, bro. It felt like a movie. Like somebody handed me a 12-page contract. Yeah. Told me to flip to the last 2 pages and sign without even reading it. Yeah. I was like, you tripping. Like, man, my older brother's a lawyer, thankfully. So I told the folks, I was like, hey, I wasn't even like paranoid at the time. I just knew better to sign something without reading it. I'm not going to do that. Right. So I did read it and I didn't understand it. So I sent it to my lawyer brother and he explained it to me. And I tried to negotiate that contract and it did not go well. Yeah. And I really felt like, wow, like when they thought I was just going to be this young, naive kid, you know, I'm early 20s who's going to sign this contract without reading it. They were my best friend. Yep. Whining and dining me. Oh, we can't wait to work with you. Oh, we have bands on tour in Europe. You're definitely going to be doing stuff like that within a year or two. I was like, word. Yeah. As soon as I started asking questions about that contract, man, those people cut me off and just stopped talking to me. And that was the end of it, you know? Yeah. And I was like, yo, you man bump this. So anyways, it's a difficult industry, not impossible, but very difficult to keep your integrity. And, you know, I look at my work and I think something that's really important for every artist is to really, for your own self, have a definition of success. Yeah. And what does success look like to you? Because what we default to, it doesn't work. And we have example after example. I don't know if you ever listened to the podcast Broken Record with Rick Rubin. You ever heard of it? No. Dude, well, you know, Rick Rubin, major music producer. Yeah. He interviews a bunch of like industry artists, right? Mm-hmm. So he has this interview with Andre 3000 from Outkast, and it's the saddest thing I've ever heard. I appreciate it because he was honest. Yeah. And, you know, Andre struggles with some mental health issues too. But basically, he was explaining that he's like, when I was younger and I was hungry as an artist, there was always hope, because in my head, it was like, once I go big, once I win a Grammy, once I make my millions, then I'm going to believe in myself and my work. Then I'm going to be confident. Yeah. And he goes, the craziest part is once you get all that and you realize all your insecurities are still there, there's no hope. He goes, because the hope was that the success would get rid of the insecurities. Right. Right? And it doesn't. Right. So again, how do you measure success?
Yeah.
And he's talking about how, now he's in competition with his younger self.
Yeah.
That now when he sits down to create, because he started talking about this because Rick Rubin asked him, hey, since Outkast broke up, Big Boy's put out, several solo projects. Can we be expecting an Andre 3000 album? And you know what he said? He says, I'm just not confident enough.
Yeah.
Andre 3000.
Yeah.
Who's one of the best rappers ever, says he wasn't confident enough. And he talks about how literally his success now is his source of insecurity. Yeah. Because when he goes to write a song, he says, well, will it be as good as the stuff that I made when I was younger?
Right.
Will it be as popular as, Hey Ya and Roses and all these things? Like these like bangers that everybody knows.
Right.
And so it's just like, man, and then he was talking about how he goes to the laundromat. Andre 3000, who could have maids who do everything for him if he wants. He says, I go to the laundromat just to feel normal.
Yeah.
I just want to sit and wash my dirty drawers like everybody else.
Yeah.
So again, it's like, what does success mean to you?
Yeah.
And for me, I know that I want to help people with the things I create. I love it. Yeah, I like making money and being a full-time artist, but that's a privilege. It's not a right. And some of the best artists in all disciplines throughout history never made a bunch of money or had a full-time job and did their art part-time, quote unquote, and were some of the best poets and painters and musicians ever. So that cannot be the measure to have commercial success in this capitalistic system is not a measure of whether or not you're a good artist. As we all know, pop stars who we think have no talent,
right?
Who, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So so it's like, what does success? And so for me, I know, when I make work, not that I need other people to praise it, like, oh, you're so talented, but when people say things like for example, I was in London, and it was literally, I got booked for this major conference in London, but while I was there, this was just earlier this year, actually, I did a bunch of tiny shows. Mm-hmm. And I did a show in a basement of a coffee shop. Could not have been more than 20 people there. Yeah. Maybe like 17 people.
Yeah.
And this dude comes up to me afterwards, and he hands me a letter.
Wow. And,
I'm like just conversing with folks, so I didn't read it right away. But I get back to my hotel room, and I open that letter, and he says, back in 2014, I put out a spoken word album called Alive and Ill. Mm-hmm. And he goes, back in 2014, a friend of mine tweeted a link, your Bandcamp link to your album. And he says, hey, this is a really cool album and it's a free download. Check it out. Just tweeted it out to his followers. Yeah. And he goes, I had never heard of you, but I thought, why not? I'm bored. Let me check out this free album. And so I downloaded it. And he goes, that album got me through one of the most difficult times in my life. I was depressed like crazy. And I listened to that album and it got me through. And he goes, to this day, every time I get in a funk, I'll go back and re-listen to that album and it gives me hope. And he goes, so I've been following you since 2014. He had never seen me perform in person before that. Yeah. He's like, I just follow you on social media. And when I saw you were doing this show in London, he's like, I don't even live in London. I drove a couple hours into the city just to see you and hand you this letter. And I'm looking and I'm like, in that moment, for this extra free gig that I tacked on in a basement with 20 people, to me, that feels like I won a Grammy. You know, to me, knowing that the work I'm creating, and at this point, now it's 2020. He's talking about my junk from 2014. So I'm like, oh, that's my old stuff. You know, I've gotten so much better since then. But to know that, man, over the years, the heart that I put into my poetry, which when that album came out, I didn't chart nothing. It was, it was a spoken word album set to music. But I'm like, okay, if I can make work that does things like that in people's lives, then I'm like, I am successful. Everything else is a cherry on top for me.
Right.
But I'm not saying that has to be everyone's definition of success. Sure. I was talking to another friend and she was saying her homeboy, who's a poet, said after he wrote his first book, when I took my book and I put it in my mother's hands and I said, your son wrote a book, boom, that was success for him.
Yeah.
Just him and his dynamic with his family and his mother. All I want to do is put a book in my mama's hands and I feel like I won a Grammy. That was his definition of success. That's dope.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm telling you, if it's just making a lot of money and winning awards, you're going to be severely disappointed because it's not fulfilling. And in order to get there, number one, it's very hard to get there. And most people who get there do it by compromising their vision.
Yeah.
And the few who don't compromise their vision and still get there will tell you that that is not the best part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
I wanna bring it back to you for a little bit in the book and in your in a time like this, you bring up Long Beach a lot. And
oh yeah.
You bring up how you can't see the stars in Long Beach. You bring up how you used to have 29-cent McDonald's in Long Beach. And I wanna hear more about what Long Beach means to you, because like everybody's hometown means a lot to them, but you've like now found your community. You're in Long Beach. What has it meant, and how does that keep evolving for you?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think for Black Americans particularly, most Black Americans, if you're descendants of slaves, you know, they didn't keep records of your heritage, of what tribes you came from, right? So there isn't a strong sense of, like, I mean, we know somewhere along the line we came from Africa, right?
Right.
So there's that knowledge there, but for a lot of folks, there's not a strong connection to the motherland as home.
Right.
Also, being born and raised in America, in a nation that despises you. You know, I met this one dude and he said he hated the term African American.
Yeah. He
says, don't call me African American. He goes, I ain't never been to Africa. My parents never been to Africa. My grandparents never been to Africa. I ain't African.
Yeah.
He goes, and definitely don't call me American. He goes, don't nobody here want me. This nation doesn't claim me as their own. So he goes, call me Black. That's the only thing that he identified as and with. And I think that you'll notice in hip hop, a lot of Black artists, myself included, they gravitate to their specific city and even their specific neighborhood often, as this is the only thing we claim. I'm not proud to be an American, but I'm from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's what, like, to me, it's like, where do I claim?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what nation in Africa I would have been from. America don't like me.
Yeah.
My mom's from Ohio. My dad's people are from Mississippi. You know, I'm like, Long Beach, especially to me specifically, growing up in the early 90s. I was born in 88, but growing up in the early 90s, you know, gangster rap was taking over the radio. And at the time, a lot of rappers who were the most successful were specifically from Long Beach, not just LA, but Long Beach. You know, you had Snoop Dogg, Nate Dogg, Warren G, you know, like when they're shouting out neighborhoods and references, like, you know, the song Regulators, Nate Dogg and Warren G had to regulate when they're like, so I hooked the left on 2-1 and Lewis. Like, that was like right basically across the street from my high school. Like, these are neighborhoods that I was familiar with, right? Yeah. So growing up, I remember through hip hop, my first sense of pride in, one, being a Black male, to know that you could be from nothing. You could be poor. You could be from the hood. You could be like all the odds stacked against you. And yet I saw these Black rappers from Long Beach, California, who defied all the odds and had folks and kids from every color all over the world singing the songs they wrote and representing all the way down to the particular blocks and neighborhoods that I was around and familiar with, and the schools that I went to. You know, Snoop Dogg went to the same high school I went to,
Really?
and he reps it all the time. Yeah, you know, there's so many music videos where he's wearing a Poly High jersey. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many music videos where he's wearing green and gold. Those are our colors, right? So you're like, to me, it was like, oh, snap. Like, these men are, like, obviously, you know, there's a lot of things about it that are problematic, which I address, especially on my new album. But there was something to it, to see these dudes and say, I'm proud to be black and I'm repping my neighborhood, and knowing that they were like me.
Yeah.
And so before I started writing, I just fell in love with it because I felt so connected to it. And, you know, Long Beach, particularly often because it's close to LA, it gets overshadowed. And I really think, like, people think of Long Beach like because of the name, it sounds like some suburban, like Orange County, like Newport Beach or Huntington.
Yeah.
And it's not. Like, it's a big city, you know, and if it wasn't as close to LA, people would probably see it more like a San Diego, like its own thing, you know. Because, I mean, we have a bigger population than Atlanta, or at least we did last time we did, like, the numbers. Sure. And so it's like, anyway, it was just cool to be represented in all those different ways. And so, yeah, I love it. I absolutely love Long Beach. But also, I think I talk about it a lot because I found in my work, no matter the topic, like, I think when you're trying to be so broad and hit everyone, you might hit everyone, but it'll be shallow. Yeah. Whereas when you really, like, zero in and you get specific, then suddenly, somehow, that specificity makes your work more universal, right? So, I don't know, it's like writing a love song to women, as opposed to writing a love song to your woman. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, well, you're going to get particular, and some of the most beautiful things are going to come out of that particularity. And I see the same thing with Long Beach. You know, I'm like, I love repping my specific city. But I found that to be a kind of an interesting thing. Because, again, whether I'm talking about racial issues, again, I can talk about white supremacy, or I can talk about, like, specific stories and experiences that I've had, and it'll hit home more. Yeah. You know? So.
Does your whole family live in Long Beach?
Most of us now. I have two brothers that we all live in California, but 4 of the 6 kids live in Long Beach with my parents, and then one of my brothers lives up in the Bay Area by San Francisco, and then my other brother lives in Santa Barbara. Yeah. But yeah, we all West Coast. We all kind of like spread out and then came back. You know, I went to Chicago for college. My siblings went to different places. But yeah, I random factoid, which I don't remember. I heard it on the internet somewhere. But it was something which really surprised me with the culture in America where so many people go off to school. But it was basically like some obnoxious high percentage of people, like over 80% of folks, end up settling down. I think they said within like 12 square miles of where they grew up. Wow. Something like that. I was insane. Like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. Yeah, I know. But it's like, it's true. I mean, I went to Chicago for 4 years. I was in Oregon for 2, but now I've been back in Long Beach for like 10, and I live very close to where I grew up. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I was like, yeah, something about it.
Man, would you mind performing any pieces you have about Long Beach?
Oh, about Long Beach. Let me think. I had some picked out, but not the Long Beach ones.
Oh, sure, that's fine. You're also able to pick whatever you want. I'm always curious because people, like, I'm from Lancaster, California, which is like an hour north of LA, and it's LA County. Like, everything's LA County. So like, what is? No one really knows what it means. But like, for me, when I tell people I'm from Lancaster and they're from Lancaster, we look in each other's eyes and we understand it all of a sudden, because it's like this kind of a trash desert town up the road. Yeah. So there's like this feeling of camaraderie, like we made it. Yeah. So I love hearing about like specific places that aren't Los Angeles, because I like hearing what you bond over.
Nah, totally. Yeah, man. But no, I picked out a few poems.
Go for it.
So I just recently released this book. It's called Here Comes This Dreamer. So I mentioned before it's in 3 different sections, and so I kind of picked out one from each section. This first poem is called 2020. Confession, I wrote it in 2019.
Nice.
So it's not really reflective of what this year has been. But I mean, it's not too far off in some ways. But yeah, it's by no means a reflection of this experience.
It did not guess the virus.
No, not at all. But it was so funny because originally I was thinking my book was gonna be out in 2019. So I wrote it, and I had to kind of change some of the words because I wrote it looking forward to 2020. But then I was like, oh, it didn't come out to 2020, so I switched up the poem a bit. Anyway, Doesn't matter. Just really funny. Because people hear the title now, they're like, oh, this one's gonna be good. Yeah. I'm like, not as good as it could have been. I need to do a 2020 part 2, actually. Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, this is the first one. 5 years beyond Back to the Future's future. 8 years beyond the Mayan apocalypse. 2 decades beyond Y2K. We exist in a future we worried would never be. I exist in a history I worry will never die. My white friend cries, ashamed of her naivety, not realizing her father was more than a socially acceptable amount of racist. Said he was disgusted at the thought of her holding her new Kenyan boyfriend's hand. I thought of the hugs we've shared, of how repulsed he would be by our gentleness. I thought of King's dream, still a dream. I thought of Langston's dream, still deferred. I wondered how short the fuse must be by now. I thought of Frederick Douglass, of his marriage to a white woman in the 1800s, shortly after his first and black wife stopped dreaming forever. I thought of dreams. I thought of future, of how it will disappoint me, of how it is 2020 and we still don't have flying cars or hoverboards. I thought of time, of how it will not save my children. I thought of love, of how it always takes courage, no matter what century it is beaten and burning and dreaming in. I wrote that poem after a conversation I had with a friend that I talk about in it, but also from the realization that the movie Back to the Future, the future they went to was 2015.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, yo, first of all, we owed. Second of all, dang, when you see the world that they envision, and, not just the technology, but the things that we're still dealing with,
right?
It's like, oh my gosh. So, but I thought that was kind of funny though. I was like, we are 5 years after Back to the Future's future. So, that
was great. Back to the Future, when it came out on Netflix, maybe 2 months ago, and I was like, oh nice, I've never seen these movies. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna watch all these movies. It's the same movie, done literally shot for shot over and over again. I was kind of bummed out. I was like, oh, these weren't released next to each other, so people were probably really enjoying this kind of a thing of
that's hilarious.
It's so similar. And now we're like, no, I literally just last night watched this movie. I'm not gonna watch it again. That was great. I have a few more questions for you. I wanted to ask you about spacing. In poetry books.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it formatted in a certain way? There's sometimes you have one poem that on the it's indented, so it goes like this. you have some poems will go like bump 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 bump
Yeah.
bump. How do you figure that out? What does that mean?
Yeah, honestly, that was one of the biggest challenges, because I've been writing poetry for a while, but I've been doing spoken word poetry. So I would memorize and perform them, and I never had to think about how my poems looked on the page. In that sense, there was no visual element to the words. But when I decided to do a book of poetry, I I bought and read a bunch of poetry books, and that was one of the first things I realized, that, you know, before you read a single word, how a poem looks on a page already starts to communicate to you. And so I started to think to myself, with the format, how do I use that, as this is a unique opportunity that I actually don't have with performing spoken word poetry, which has its own, you know, different unique ways, things that I can use to communicate. But now I'm like, okay, like sometimes I try to the best of my ability to not just have it be random, but there be meaning in the way I print it. And sometimes the reader will pick up on that. Sometimes maybe not. It'll just be a personal thing. But like the one you mentioned, Booming, right? Where I format it in a way where it's literally creating a wave down the side of the page. It's supposed to be mimicking like a sound wave, a deeper sound wave, a bass sound wave. But it's also supposed to be calming. You know, you think of waves and ocean, and because the poem is about the fact that when I am stressed out, when I need to calm down, I love just listening to loud music in the car. And it just, when that bass hit and I roll the window down and I'm just like, all is well. I'm at peace. You know, so you look at the poem and before you even read it, you're like, oh, it's wavy, it's calm, it's peaceful. You know, you can communicate chaos. You know what I'm saying? You can communicate so many things with how a poem is printed. So yeah, there was a lot of thought that goes into it for sure.
Is there a way that you read it differently? Like if you talk like this, is that when you space it out and like make it like kind of like a stair ladder down, or how do you figure it out?
Yeah, so you definitely have less control over how your audience receives the poem when it's in a book, right? A lot of the formatting, when it's not trying to play off of the content, but it's more trying to point the reader in a particular direction, it's just that. How do I format this in a way so that they read it with the rhythm I would like them to have? And so there is punctuation, there's indentation, you know, like sometimes I don't use punctuation in my book for the most part, unless it's a question mark. There's no like commas or periods. I just didn't like the way that would break things up. But there are times where I want pauses. So I have to figure out different ways to get people to pause. I'll use capitalization for a new beginning of a new sentence. But even the line breaks, you know, sometimes people will read to the end of the line, but that's not necessarily the end of the sentence. So where you break that line will affect the rhythm. And sometimes you want them to, like, the most natural way is to read to the end of a sentence, right? If there was a period, if it wasn't a poem. But when you have line breaks, sometimes the intention there, even though the sentence isn't over, you want to read to the end of the sentence, or you want to break the line in the middle, because sometimes you can play with double meanings, right? So there's like a statement, like 3 words, which on its own might mean one thing, but then in the context of the whole sentence will mean something different. And so it's a lot of that too. Like, hey, you know what? Like, I want to separate. I might have one line be its own stanza because I want to like put it in bold, basically, by breaking it apart from the other poems, even though it's actually still in rhythm, and I don't want you to like completely stop. I just want you to pause. So it was something that I feel like that was my biggest struggle, because I hadn't printed my poetry before. So I really had to get creative and read. And there's just so many different forms. Like, none of my forms are like, I guess, classical forms. Like, you have, sonnets, which all have a very particular rhythm. But I kind of just create my own forms for each poem. And it was dope. It was challenging, but it's always interesting to see how people interpret things, because no matter how much you try to control, and this isn't just with like poetry on the page, even times where I've done spoken word performances or songs, and people will come up to you and say things that they got out of it that I'm like, well, that's not what I meant. Yeah. But now that you pointed out, like, I can see what you mean, though. Like, it is in there, but I didn't put it in there on purpose. Or I can see the way you interpret that, why it would make you feel this particular way, which, like, I don't know. I have a problem with, like, super abstract art where I'm like, it just means whatever you want it to mean. I don't believe that. I think the artist always had something in mind, even if they don't let you know that. But I want that balance to where it's like, okay, I might have had a particular and clear intention, but again, I can't control how people receive something, no matter how intentional and clear I try to be. And there's actually something beautiful about that to me now, that because of their own life and experiences and perspectives, they engage my art and it illuminates something in them that I didn't intend and couldn't have.
Your art often intertwines with religion and family and your view of God and justice and personal experiences. How you've also mentioned on your Instagram, you have a pastor at your church who supports you and appreciates what you do as an artist. How do your religious views inform your art? How do you figure out how to mesh those?
Yeah, no, absolutely. To me, creative practice is an inherently spiritual thing. And when I say spiritual, even if you're not associated with any particular religious group, we all know that art hits you on a level that is deeper than just the intellect and logic and thinking, right? And I do not think by any means that spirituality is antagonistic towards intellect or logic. I think they're complementary. I think they're both and, that we should always, think with our head and our heart. These things, I think, have been set up to be pit against each other. And even, honestly, even in a lot of like sexist expressions of it, like women are emotional and men are intellectual. And I'm like, nah, like humans are thinking, feeling beings, and we all need, like, if I'm trying to get you to care about the oppression of Black people, I don't only appeal to the statistics and the numbers and incarceration rates and blah, blah, blah. I'm also appealing to your heart, to your emotions, to your spirit, And so I think that it would be irresponsible as an artist to not recognize the effect that you're having on people's spiritual well-beings, right? No matter what type of art you make. You know what I'm saying? If you making art about being a drug addict and getting drunk every weekend, or being suicidal, or just, literally anything that any ideas that you are putting forth, whether they're discussions of them or celebrations of them, they have the potential to affect how people think, act, feel. It can affect their holistic health. Music, even without lyrics, can make people feel a certain way. There's sounds that sound sad. You know what I'm saying? There's sounds that sound happy, right? Yeah. So I think that, to me, these things are always been inseparable. And if I'm going to make art that reflects the whole of who I am, then it is definitely going to address my spirituality.
Yeah.
No matter what I believe, as a particular person of Christian faith, and a Black Christian, when I look at the history of that, that's another reason why I talk so much about racial justice issues, because again, so many people think like this is something that is like a political issue apart from like religious. But I'm like, man, the civil rights movement was deeply rooted in the faith of Black Americans. The organization that Martin Luther King was a part of that helped, that really laid the blueprints for the movement was called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The I Have a Dream speech was a sermon where he's quoting the prophet Amos, let justice roll down like a mighty river. That's the Bible.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking and I'm like, yo, as a Black person, if I'm going to be addressing these issues, of course, this oppression has taken a toll on our spiritual lives. This is the history of my people. And they found hope. And they realized that we don't just need to change these laws, but we also need to address the hearts and the spirits of the nation, both of ourselves and of our neighbors who hate us, right? So, yeah, I look at it like, again, I don't shy away from any topic. I also don't feel like certain topics are more or less spiritual than others. I think, I have a reputation for talking about race and serious things, but joy and laughter and silliness are just as important in the human experience.
Yeah.
And so I think it is important to have balance and celebration, because I personally, specifically identifying not just as an artist, but as a poet, I think poets have this reputation of darkness around them.
Yeah.
Right? Where there's just, you wear all black and you're sad and you talk about your feelings. And I know, as I sit here in all black, but the thing is, like there's this quote which it's attributed to a lot of different people, but I actually hate it, and I wrote a poem in response to it one time. But the quote, more or less, there's versions of it that says, "Oh, writing is easy. You just sit down at a typewriter and bleed." And there is this idea that your best art comes from your pain.
Mm-hmm.
And your spiritual agony. And I just disagree with that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with creating from pain and turning, making beauty from ashes. Yeah. But doesn't it make more sense that experiences that are already beautiful inspire beauty? Why would you exclusively make beauty from ashes when you could make beauty from beauty?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. You don't always gotta flip it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You don't. There are beautiful things in this world, and the tension and the struggle is, it's never all or nothing, both as an individual and as a life experience. We like to make people heroes or villains, right? They're all good or they're all bad. We like to talk about our lives that way. Woe is me, or everything's good. No, it's like life is this strange and perpetual mixture of, there is always, at every moment in human existence, a reason to celebrate and a reason to mourn, right? And, and so the poem I wrote in response to it was called "Beauty is Beautiful Too," which sounds stupid, but really, as artists, you would think that we only make beautiful things when everything's awful.
Right.
And it's like, nah. So yeah, for me, when I write about spirituality, it's a part of my existence. So it's going to be there. And so, but I will say I'm just as quick to write about playing with my nephews and nieces, to write about a delicious sandwich that I had.
Yeah.
I feel like that's equally important. Yeah. We need to be able to freely mourn when we need to, and we need to laugh and be reminded of the beauty that is always in existence, as well as the pain.
Yeah. I would say that you do a decent job at silliness. A lot of your Instagram stories involve you reviewing terribly flavored potato chips and saying how you feel about them while you eat them. which is
Yeah, absolutely.
it's quite riveting. I'm always watching it longer than I intended to. Why am I?
You're like, why can't I look away?
I'm like a minute 15 into this. I get it, but I'm still watching. It's because you chew so loud in the videos, which is a big part of the experience.
Oh man,
that's sweet. Well, would you mind reading those last two poems that you had in mind, and then and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, totally, man. I can just skip to one. There was a lot in here.
Oh, one of my favorite examples of you doing like a beauty from ashes thing in your book was the manna thing.
Yeah.
Because I like everybody has an experience like that. Like everyone's parents have taken them to eat crappy foods like pretty regularly. And so one, I just think it's like human relatable, which is really helpful for art. And then two, it like does a really good job of showing how this like totally terrible corporation that we allow in this country, like how it holds this really dear part in our hearts. And I just think that it's such a good mix of like happy and sad. And I just really related to that because that's basically what junk food is like, like I know I shouldn't like this, but I really do. And I always have, and I always will. And there's nothing you can do.
Absolutely. And that's it. And honestly, that's what the album I mentioned before, Alive and Ill, was about, is that tension, that mix of happy and sad that is just like perpetually there. So it's pretty cool. I want to read this last poem, but I actually want to throw out a writing prompt for anyone listening who might be an artist themselves, whether you write it in a poem or a song or just like a journal entry. I actually wrote this poem because I got booked at a conference and they wanted me to do 4 different poems and they gave me 4 different words. Right. And they're like, you don't have to do all new content. If you have something that fits these 4 words, that's fine. But like, I don't remember what all the words were, but one of them in the 4 sections of this conference, one of them was fear. So it was like, fear and joy or forgiveness, something like that. So I didn't have anything that fit the theme of fear. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to have to write something new. So what I decided to do was I was just going to brainstorm. And then after the brainstorm, maybe try to write a poem. So my brainstorming consisted of, I was like, well, I'm just going to make a list of everything I'm afraid of. Big fears, small fears, everything. And that was the idea. But I got to the end of the list and I was like, oh, the list is the poem. So anybody out there is really interesting. But yeah, just make a list. Literally just a list of everything you're afraid of. Everything. Big things, small things, and everything in between. And just see what comes out. So that's where this poem comes from. It's called Can You Repeat the Question? A list of things I'm afraid of in no particular order. Dance floors. Not dancing. Dance floors. Dancing in public. I'm afraid of loving the poems more than the muse. Of making poor art. Of being obsessed with making good art. Forgetting why I make art in the first place. I'm afraid of being a bad husband one day. Of putting my work before my bride. Having a wandering eye. A sharp tongue. Becoming a lazy romantic. Being arrogant. I'm afraid of how much I love being right. I'm afraid of being wrong. Being wrong about God. Dying and decomposing into non-existence, into whatever I was before birth, of praying to Jesus, then crossing into eternity to tremble before the throne of a truth I never knew, a love I never worshipped. When my faith is doubtful, I fear that I've been blowing hot air for years, calling people to believe in false hope. I know there's no way the scientific method can guarantee the most important facts. I'm afraid because I know I have to believe, have to wait, have to live by faith. I'm afraid of racist dogs with sharp teeth, and their owners who swear they're harmless, who swear they usually never act like this, who don't know what's gotten into them or where they got it from. I'm afraid of my blind spots, of not smelling my own stank when others felt the funk a mile away. I'm afraid of easy answers, of solutions that seem too convenient. When the truth always aligns with my perspectives, I have to question the way I measure truth. I'm afraid of the day I stop asking questions, when I'm always the teacher and never the disciple. I'm afraid of how difficult it is for me to be in the audience and enjoy the show, to sit in the pew without being overly critical. I'm afraid of the way I only love my own songs and trust my own thoughts. I'm afraid I might be creating my own God. I'm afraid I'll never know love because I got too much fear, and I've made it too comfortable. I've catered to its every need. I've let fear rest in the bed I made for love, gave it a foot rub and cooked it breakfast, then got the nerve to wonder why love never comes my way. I gotta take a shower and clean these sheets. I'm afraid if love came, they would smell the fear all over me. But I'm afraid that fear won't leave until love busts down the door, and I ain't heard a knock in years. I'm afraid of metaphors, of being too poetic, of my message getting lost in imagery. So I keep it straightforward and blunt. I'm afraid of being too blunt, of not being poetic enough. I'm afraid of not being respected by my poetry peers, of poets finding out that I don't know jack about poetry. I don't know jack about Kerouac, Dickinson, or Angelo. I never studied the classics, didn't major in creative writing, never messed with iambic pentameter, never read poetry books. I'm afraid of how good I've gotten at fronting. I'm afraid of being the only black person on a panel discussion. I'm afraid of being seen as an expert on everything just because I talk good and write rhymes. This fool has 3 doctorates. Homegirl has 4. What am I here for? How did I get here? What am I doing? I'm afraid I don't know. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know the answer. I'm afraid I don't have the answers. Here we go. So there was that one. Yeah, man. So
That's so good.
Yeah,
man.
check it out. Here Comes This Dreamer.
You wrote that just straight out?
I mean, most of it. I mean, I definitely went back and edited it afterwards, but yeah, I just started writing my.
Okay, I was like, man, that was
No.
just off the dome writing your fears, writing this long poem.
Oh no. Yeah, no, like
That's amazing.
Once I kind of got into it and I realized, oh, this is the poem.
Okay.
Then I kind of.
Yeah, I'm currently writing a poem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought after, like at the very end, you were like, "Wait, this is a poem," and I'm like,
"No." I got about halfway into the list, and I was like, "Oh, this is the idea now." So then I kind of shifted. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Like, what does your grocery list look like?
Yeah.
Too funny. Yeah, man.
I need bagels. I need bugles. Bugles to put on the toes of my lover. My witch-toed lover.
I'm a toe sucker. What? Yeah. Nah, bro. It was great chatting with you, but I have so many projects coming out. So again, this book just came out, but I'm doing an audio book, so it'll be all the poems read by me, and about a third of them will have some music, light music behind them. I'm also working on a joint EP with my homegirl Lucy, and that's in a whole different lane from anything else I've ever put out. It's more like folky. We dropped 2 singles already. One is called Simple, one is called Water. So you can check those out. And then also I'm working on a hip-hop album, another full-length hip-hop project, which will hopefully be out before the year is over. But next thing that will drop will be the folk duo project with Lucy, then the audio book, and then the hip-hop album. So, yeah.
Cool. When does the full project with Lucy drop?
Soon as we finish it, bro.
All right, great.
I started dropping singles to put the pressure on, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, yo.
Yeah.
Like, I'm working with it. Yeah. But it should hopefully be out within a month. It'll be 8 tracks long. Mostly piano and acoustic driven. Just real simple songs. Yeah. So.
Cool. Great.
Yeah, man.
They already sound great for these first 2 singles, so I'm excited to hear the rest.
Thanks, man. Yeah, follow me on IG. at Micah Bournes. Yeah.
Awesome.